There are various settings or features and functions of your Scan and Cut machine that you will need to set in the settings menu. This is accessible through this icon here, the little spanner. If you tap on that, you will access the settings for a great number of different things. On page 1 you will find available languages, so if English isn't your first language, you may be able to find a different language that is more familiar to you. If you prefer working in millimeters or inches, you can set this here. So you either tap millimeters or inches and the units of measurement change accordingly. Later in this series of videos we will be taking a look at how to use the cut area to our advantage. However, this is also useful if you use either the 12 by 12 or 12 by 24 inch mats. If you tap on this icon, you have two quick links to set the cutting area to be either 12 by 24 or 12 by 12. And remember, your machine is able to tell the difference between these mats, so if you arrange something to cut on a 12 by 24 mat but accidentally load a 12 by 12 mat, it will tell you you've got the wrong mat installed, and you can then change that without causing any damage to your machine or its accessories. The background contrast will become relevant when we take a look at scanning operations, and in particular the preview function, so I will come back onto this later. In page 2 of our settings we have access to the cutting speed and pressure and the drawing speed and pressure. Cutting speed and pressure are adjustable elements that allow us to use a huge variety of different materials when cutting them with our Scan and Cut machine. Generally the factory default are 3 and 0, and there are very few occasions where you'll need to change that. If you do need to change it, according to the settings guide that comes with your machine, this is where you will access it, and to make changes simply tap on the plus or minus arrow to get to the recommended settings for the material that you are using. Draw speed and draw pressure when using the standard pen and standard pen holder won't change from the factory defaults. You may however like to take a look at these if you are using the universal pen holder with different types of pens, as adjusting these can give you a better result. We'll cover more about this when we come on to the drawing functions later. On page 3 we have a variety of different things here. Auto shutdown is the time between inactivity on the machine and when it will automatically shut down to save power. You can change it by pressing on the plus or minus icons. I usually leave it to the factory default of 1 hour. If you do go away and leave your machine and it shuts down, you will be given the option to recall the last thing that you are working on when you turn the machine back on. So don't panic, you won't lose your work. The buzzer sound is the beeping that you get when you tap on something on the screen. If you don't like it, you can turn it off. If you find it a comfort that it is acknowledging your tap on screen, then leave it on. We've talked about seam allowance on a number of videos in the course so far, and this is where you will set that. There are industry standards when it comes to seam allowances, and Brother has incorporated all of these within this option. So it starts at a scant 3mm and works its way up through some millimeter settings all the way to a 1/4 inch, which is often the standard for patchwork, up to 1/2 inch and 5/8 inch, which you may find you will be using for clothing or other fashion accessories. Once you get to the end, it will cycle through the earlier settings again. Once you have this set, you will need to come back and change it here if you wish to make any changes to that for patterns. Pattern interval is the space in between the shapes on your mat. If you're working with paper and cardstock, the default of 1 is perfectly fine. If you're working with woven fabrics such as cottons or denims, you may wish to increase that, and this gives the machine more substrate between the shapes to enable it to hold everything steady while it's cutting. You'll find this out by experimentation, but generally for paper and cardstock 1 is fine, and for fabrics I would increase it to 3 and above. On the next page we have options to turn off or on the opening screen. So the animated screen that comes on when you first turn your machine on can be turned off. So if you get bored of watching it, turn it off. If you're happy with it, turn it on. Scanning cutting position adjustment is a way of making sure that your scanning eye is perfectly aligned to where your blade is cutting. So for example, with the direct cut function, if you're finding that the cut line is offset from the outline of the shape that's been scanned, you can come in here and do a calibration and reset that. We will cover this in detail in a later section of this course. Blade adjustment area is really just to sort of help get most use out of your mat. So if you're finding that it's getting quite a lot of use in a particular area, you can set it to be a specific section, and you can set it to use a part of it or all of it. Fill additional line is where we would set up the draw fill function and choose the pattern. We'll cover this more in depth when we come on to the drawing functions. However, just briefly, we have 5 installed patterns with which we can get very creative. We have the ability to change the spacing between those lines to make the pattern denser or more spaced out. We have the ability to rotate the direction of the fill. So for example, with a simple line pattern, we can change that to run at 45 degrees perhaps, or other increments of rotation. On page 2, we can add additional lines between the lines that are already there, and we can choose the spacing between those particular lines as well. As I mentioned, we will cover this more when we come on to the draw fill functions later. Additional pages will depend on your machine. However, you will have a page that will give you your machine's number, and this is particularly important if you have a Wi-Fi enabled machine, as you will need to enter this in Canvas Workspace in order to link your account with your machine. The version means the version of the software that is installed on your machine, and this just gives you a guide to show you whether you have the latest software version on your machine or not. If not, you can obviously go through the update process, which we have covered already in this course. Machine information just gives a number of different additional pieces of information to you. You can't really set these or change these, it's just really what's available with this particular machine. So if you're not sure what your machine is capable of, this is worth having a look at. So in my case with the CM900, I know that I can scan up to 12 by 24 inches. I know that I can cut a maximum of 600 patterns in one pass. I know that I have wireless network functionality available, and I know that I can import Brother Applique embroidery data designs. If you're curious, it might be worth having a look at that on your machine before moving on with this course. The next page really is relevant to Wi-Fi capability, and it's down to what networks are available, and we will again be covering this in another section of this video. Page 7 for my machine gives me some details of the Scan and Cut online ID, so I know that I've linked it with my Canvas Workspace account. This can be changed, and if you are thinking of passing on your machine, you can delete these details as well, so that the next user can register with their details and so that your account is not accessible through this machine. And then premium functions relates to any of the accessory kits that need activating. So I have embossing and foiling, and both are turned on. If they are turned off, you may see some icons on screen as we're working through this course that you don't have, so you may need to go in and activate these before you can access those. You can also access the settings for these individual kits here as well. So if you need to make any changes or additions, or even go through that process of setting this up for the first time, then here is where you will find that information. Again, I will cover this information when we come on to talking about these specific kits.
For now, that's the settings screens complete.